I'm an ML student, like machine learning student, and have a certification in machine learning. Slow flow and no reflow after primary PCI is a complex, multifactorial phenomenon. It can be due to actually multiple effects or the interrelated phenomenon such as pre-existing microvascular dysfunction. It can be because of functional reflow due to embolism. It can be ischemia, reperfusion, injury, or even like individual susceptibility. We have defined it always in the as less than TIMI grade 3 flow with a frame count of 30 frames per second. In the absence of dissection, thrombus, and spasm, and we know that unless we convert functional slow reflow early into structural no reflow, it'll lead to more adverse immediate and long-term outcomes. So the study objectives were to detect potential predictors of slow flow and no reflow in patients undergoing primary PCI and its associated impact, as I mentioned earlier. It was a prospective study done from Jan 2010 to December 31st, 2017 with a 5-year target analysis of outcomes. With the power of study with 85%, we required 714 patients, we got 731. And the inclusion criteria were primary PCI with rescue PCI within the first 12 hours if there was failed lysis and there's ongoing chest pain or hemodynamic instability. We had 5 operators doing the study, 3 from our hospital, 2 from Puttaparthi, since it's a 2-center study, all doing more than 100 PTCS annually. So we had this patient flow where it was 734 patients which was taken. We compared those with arm A as slow flow with no reflow being developed as versus those who did not develop slow flow, no reflow. We tried to compare the baseline predictors and the characters by univariate and multivariate regression, and then also applied 4 different machine learning models which I'll be discussing. We had a 5-year outcome which was seen in 88% of patients. We had a 12% attrition, and then we applied it to a validation cohort of 225 patients over the next 5 years, that is up to June 30th, 2022, of which we have done 225 patients, 119 in our hospital, 106 in Puttaparthi. Our outcomes at 5 years were rehospitalization for heart failure arrhythmias, LV remodeling by echo, need for prophylactic ICD, or mortality from sudden cardiac death. In the univariate predictors that was seen, we have seen 33 variates in which we have seen that if the patient was diabetic, if he was a current smoker, and then he was actually worse, if he had previous angina pectoris, actually protective, anterior MI was more likely to actually result in slow flow. Similarly, though the WBC count was normal, N/L ratio was higher, eGFR was lower, admission sugars were lower, that were actually higher, that is more than 300 mg/%. LDL cholesterol also was more than 150, HDL less than 30 was significantly higher in those with slow flow, no reflow. Admission in cardiogenic shock portended to much more of slow flow, no reflow, and even triglycerides were higher in these patients. Again, on the univariates, when we went for the LVEF, it was much lower, less than 35. We went for a vasotrope inotrope index of more than 35, that is dopamine plus dobutamine plus 100 times adri, 100 times noradri. That was much higher in patients who had developed slow flow. Then, of course, we had more of need of intubation in them, and we had higher lactates. The thrombus grade 3 was much more in slow flow, no reflow, and we had higher usage of GPI and IBP in these patients. After this, when we did a multivariate regression, at that time we found out that admission BP more than 140 was actually protective with a hazard ratio of minus 3.2. TIMI 2 and less, that is more sort of portending towards slow flow. If the patient was a current smoker, if the patient had admission BP less than 90, the patient was diabetic with an admission sugar, as I said, more than 300. Osteoproximal LAD with the anterior MI with EF of less than 35, BI score of more than 35, that's vasotropic index more than 35, need for intubation, lactate, and of course admission with cardiogenic shock, as I mentioned earlier. All these were given a weightage, and as per that, the area under curve in the training model was 0.70 for a score more than 10, 0.708. So we went with these in the 225 patients where we went ahead, that is in the validation cohort, we actually got an area under curve of performance of 0.68, which is fair. Then actually I applied machine learning to this, and I actually did this because when I applied this onto a SPSS software 26 and we put in the variates as a dependent variable and multiple independent variables, I found out that when I did dependent more versus independent more, the standard error was very high. That's why I have applied machine learning to all my studies. The standard error is high even when we do a multivariate analysis. I got a standard error of 4 or 5 at times, which is much more than what is allowed at 1.96, that is beyond the confidence interval. So then when I applied all of these figures, this is called as a heat map, it is done in Python. I have learned Python for this, I have coded this. So when we have done this, all the parameters there from top to bottom were seen against each parameter. So if we do this, we get actually a heat map as to each variable, how it reacts with the other like 32 variables. Each one against 32 like were taken, that is age versus the male, age versus BP, age versus diabetes, age versus smoker. So we get a lot of combinations of this, and this actually gives an ML derived score which was much better. This is called as a SHAP analysis. A SHAP analysis essentially is if we go towards the right, that is if we have more of red, it tells us if a predictor is there, how strongly predictor it is. If it is blue, then if it is not there, how strongly negative predictor it is. Now in this I applied 3 different analysis, a naive Bayes, I applied an SVM, that is a support vector machine, and of course a random forest. 3 were given, of which this was the best. So in this, I actually got an area under curve of almost 0.84. If you see this, the most important predictors are thrombus grade 3 more than 3, thrombus grade more than 3, or no thrombus aspiration being done, admission glucose more than 300, if there was a baseline TIMI of less than 1, if the total ischemic time was more than 12 hours, if the systolic blood pressure was more than 100, but if it is more than 140, it is still it's still protective. But 100 to 140 still has a range of being negative predictive. VI score of more than 35, SVG grafts versus native, if the N/L ratio was more than 5, if the HDL was less than 30, if the patient is an active smoker, if the patient has an MPV of more than 12 femtoliters, if it is a CRP of more than 5, and of course the other things I mentioned. So each of them were actually graded. The total score was around 36. So then when I went with tertiles of less than 12, 13 to 24 and more than 24 to 36, we saw that the observed one was actually 83 when the probability would have been 84. So it does very well in the forward validation. So you're in the training model it is 0.81, in the validation it is 0.825. In terms of the logistic regression which I have seen down, it's almost 0.67. It's much lower in this. This is in the same 225 patients which I have studied with the regression. As you see that the AUC is much lower, and in the SVM model is much higher, 0.83. After this, when we applied it to the KM analysis, the Kaplan-Meier showed us that till the 60 months, the curves start diverging very early. So the effect of the negative effect of slow flow starts very early. It diverges very early there. Within 1 year, we can see the outcome and freedom from death is much lower if we see in terms of the tertiles. That is, as I said, 12 to 24 or more than 24. So my conclusion is that we have to do earlier revascularization, and thrombus aspiration is actually better. In terms of occurrence of slow flow, no reflow, it strongly correlates with the higher total ischemic time of more than 12 hours because of late referral. We get a lot of late referrals in our hospital. Unfortunately, they don't do well. If you have a larger thrombus grade, that is more than 3, if it's occlusive, aspiration was seen to be protective. If there's an admission SBP of less than 90, it is more predictive. More than 140 is actually protective again. If it is admission sugars of more than 300, actually had the highest area under curve. We feel that an ML derived score is stronger than LR derived score because of the fact that logistic regression can have a higher standard error of mean, and it independently predicts higher rehospitalization even up to 5 years and increased incidence of heart failure. Thank you so much.